Hello and welcome to the NKU Chase College of Law Admission Counseling Series. My name is Ashley Seamer and I'm the Director of Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at NKU Chase College of Law. And today I am going to share with you some information about the parts of your application known as resumes and letters of recommendation. And in this workshop, we're going to cover a few things that will help you prepare to put the pieces of resumes and letters of recommendation together in the most helpful and useful way as you start the admissions process. So first, I'm going to cover why are these documents important? We often hear, of course, about our LSAT scores, our academic history, writing our personal statement, and oftentimes we don't hear enough information about resumes and letters of recommendation and how they're useful to an applicant's overall application to law school. Next, I will cover tips for preparing the resume. And finally, I will share some advice for the letters of recommendation. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about why are these documents important. First of all, as we've mentioned earlier, you have several pieces of information that's contained in your application file. We know about personal statements, your LSAT scores, your transcripts and academic history, but you also have the opportunity to submit a document known as the resume, and you have the opportunity to submit letters of recommendation. And through the resume and the letters of recommendation, one of the key reasons that these are so important is that we often can find additional information that we're not seeing elsewhere in the application materials. If you watched our series about putting together your personal statement, you know the general advice is to put together a approximately 2-page statement, maybe centered on one or two important themes about who you are or what your motivation for law school is or what you would want the committee's members to really focus on in about 5 minutes as to why they should want to see someone like you in their law school classroom. And if you follow that advice, you'll realize quickly that there's not a lot of space or place to put in other key pieces of your background and history that have also been important in shaping who you are. And the resume and letter of recommendation can then serve as those additional key points that we're not picking up elsewhere. So we might learn from a resume interest that you have or accolades that you've received that you didn't really talk about in the personal statement, but still add to points of information about you that would be important to the committee. We might learn from letters of recommendation a particular insight into your work ethic or your scholastic ability that, again, you might not even be aware of because it's being written from someone else's point of view of who you are and therefore might not have made it into the personal statement. So in my opinion, a resume and a letter of recommendation add to give you an opportunity to give a full picture of who you are, and it allows the committee to maybe pick up on some points that they otherwise would not have known. And that creates what I call sort of your marketing file. They're also important because they might lead to some information that help us see how you might fit at Chase. Obviously, with most places and most law schools, there are going to be programming or backgrounds or values or missions that a particular university or school holds dear. And knowing what background a person has come from or what prior experiences that they've had may make the committee member pause for a moment and say, oh, you know, they probably would be interested in X. So if you've learned a little bit about Chase and through your research, you might know we have a Lunsford Academy for Law, Business, and Technology. And if for some reason we were reading through an application and we saw someone who had maybe some experiences or background where we feel like the Lunsford Academy might really be a good fit for them, that gives us just some additional information to consider as we're developing and putting together our class. Now, I will also say, typically, that information is also most helpful post-admission, meaning if you are admitted to the law school, we might also have some scholarship opportunities from different donors where they're looking for a particular type of student that has had, again, an experience or a background or has been involved in a particular community involvement that matches up well with the donor's intention, and that helps us to reach out. Or we might have a faculty member who would come to us and say, you know what, I'd really like to start to talk with some admitted students about their, who have a background, who served maybe as on the mock trial team while in college. Or I want to talk with some admitted applicants who have a science background because I'm developing a particular course that I just really want them to become aware of. And so all of those pieces of information help us to see how you might fit at Chase, and then also give you an opportunity to see how you will fit back, because we're able to reach out to you because you have provided such a complete picture of who you are. And finally, these documents are important because they do help keep you from cramming way too much information into your personal statement. And as, again, we've had a series about writing the personal statement and where your focus should be, too many times people think the personal statement is the only place where they have to put in every single bit of information that they feel like is important. And it becomes pretty hard to read. It has a lack of focus. We're not really able to follow what you're telling us. It reads to be a little bit boring because it starts to read like just a checklist of achievements. And that's not what we're hoping for in the personal statement. So knowing that you still have two other opportunities with the resume and the letter of recommendation to highlight some additional information from to the committee about your background should help you to streamline your personal statement to really be what it should, and allowing the other documents to serve as the next step in your marketing file, so that important information is not left unnoticed. So let's move on and start first with the resume and go through just some basic tips for preparing. First of all, I'm going to encourage you to resist the urge of just using your career-focused resume. So hopefully everyone at some point has put together a resume as they were looking through the job search. Maybe you are a seasoned professional and you have a working resume that has helped you as you've climbed your professional development ladder. Or you might be a college student who has visited the career development office and realized that as you were seeking your first job that you were going to use their assistance, and they helped you put together a resume. And all of that is wonderful because it is a starting document for you. But I want you to take a moment and realize the reader. When you are reading an application to go to law school, you're typically a faculty member who is looking to admit people to continue on with a course of study in an educational setting. These are not prospective employers reviewing the document to see how you will fit with a specific role that's being hired for. And oftentimes when people just sort of put together their career-focused resume and send it in, it's not a bad thing. But again, it might be an opportunity where you have missed a chance to let the committee know more about you as an overall individual and potential law student, rather than just specifically someone who would be joining a particular workforce. So as you're keeping that in mind, realize there are some formats with a career-focused resume that will work. Obviously, organizational skill, basic font size, type size, keeping it to certainly no more than 2 pages. I think 2 pages probably for law schools is a little bit of a stretch for a resume anyway. But there are some things you don't need, right? Like you don't need an objective. You maybe don't need as much information about how you are specifically qualified based on a certain skill set that you've picked up over the years for a particular job. There might be other things other than your professional development that might be more important as you're thinking about going to law school. So again, just resist that urge of looking at it as only what you have prepared to look for a job. So how do you do that? First and foremost, organize, organize, organize. Put together all of your information in a way that allows you to categorize specific highlights of your background. So obviously, categories about professional development or job history, that's a category. A category about your academic achievements, certainly a category. A category about your community involvement or your volunteer experience or anything that you wish to share about how you've been involved in leadership roles. It could be through, again, a faith organization, or it could be through a community-based nonprofit or outreach mission. It could be even if you've been involved with local, state, or national politics. Anything that demonstrates how you have been civically engaged could be a category. And then finally, sometimes there's a category that I also think of as maybe personal interest or not necessarily hobbies, but things that you have done and accomplished just on your own initiative that weren't directly tied to a work or an educational institution, but were really driven from what sparks your interest or where you really wanted to develop yourself personally. And that could be anything from maybe there's a certification that you achieved on your own because you had an interest in a certain software system. Or maybe you have become trained to lead a fitness class. Or maybe you've sought out just basic leadership certifications on your own through different community groups because it was a personal interest. Maybe you're someone who's gone through, we have a master gardening course offered through some of our extension offices, and you're just someone who is really interested in that type of work, and so you sought that out on your own personal time. That could be its own category. Now you'll start to see as you organize, right? There's a lot of information that you could think about submitting in your resume that you might have overlooked. One key thing as you're organizing though, is to really determine where is the best fit for how this information is going to flow through the document. So again, if you're one of our seasoned working professionals and your job history is probably of the most recent development that you've had or where you've really had some extensive time and background, maybe your work history does come first. If you're a college student or recently out of college, maybe it's your academic that needs to be the highlight first, even if you've held some jobs. And if you've been someone who maybe you have stayed at home in a caretaking role or as a parent, you might determine, well, maybe my personal sort of accomplishments and interests really become the most important thing that I list first in my organization because I've been out of the workforce for a while, or maybe I've been out of school for a while. So just keep in mind, you want to put it together in a way that makes sense, but also is organized in a way that really highlights who you are. Because again, we're not hiring for a job. We are looking for a future student. And along those lines, as you're putting together and brainstorming your categories and organizing the information, keep in mind you need to filter out the filler. And we all know what it means to pad a resume or to feel like you've got to put everything in because everything is important. Take a minute to note that it's only important if we're able to read it and pay attention to it. And if you've buried so much information onto a one-page document, the likelihood that the important stuff is going to be caught is reduced, right? Because we're having to sort of sort through everything that's filler. So this isn't a time to put together everything that you've done. Again, I always say it's quality over quantity. And we would much rather see you highlight 2 or 3 community involvements that have been the most important to you than feel like you've got to list everything that you've done for the past 10 years, because then we don't have any way of noting where were you involved? Were you just sort of a joiner of everything, or you were someone who was really committed to a few projects and gained some growth through those projects? Same thing with your job history. We don't really need to know every technical aspect that would be important if we were hiring you for a position. Instead, you want to make sure that you're not putting in so much information that's related to your job that starts to outweigh the information that maybe we should pick up on, which is, again, highlight the most meaningful. And so if you were a college student and you worked what we would call sort of your traditional college level type positions, we really just maybe need to know that you worked full time, or you carried so many hours while carrying so many hours in an academic load, because that might be the most important thing in helping us evaluate how you performed in school, with the fact that you were also taking on a job. If you're in a more advanced stage of your career, we might just want to know what accolades or what promotions have you received during your time that are most important, rather than, again, all of the specific software or techniques that you had to learn to effectively do that job. And why is it important to highlight the most meaningful? Because it, again, helps us to understand why something is important. And that's what you want to be sure as you look through your final draft of your resume. Have you fully explained why something might be important? Some things are pretty apparent, but for instance, if you note that you've received the John Smith Award, and everybody at your university knows that's a big deal, you have to be careful in the assumption that we're going to know, right? So maybe you would put the bullet point, receive the John Smith Award, which goes to the student in the sociology department as selected by the faculty as the top writing scholar, and it's offered only to one student. Then we really get a peek into why that is important and why that might be impressive. So when you're going through your final resume draft, again, keep these things in mind. Have I organized it in a way that highlights what's most meaningful to me, that really demonstrates the highlights of who I am and what I want the committee to focus on? Have I taken out all of the information that becomes distracting because I'm trying to fill the space, or I'm trying to fluff it up in a way that maybe makes it more impressive? And have I explained thoroughly why it's important they should know that? And if you really don't know that it's that important, maybe it's a spot on the resume that needs to come out of your resume. And again, for instance, if you were a member of 10 organizations, you were only 2 that were really involved, where you held some leadership, or you've participated in organizing a fundraiser, or you did a lot of recruiting outreach and increased the membership, highlight those 2 for sure, with some information about what your contribution was to the particular organization, and then maybe save a bullet point to just say, and I was, an active member in the 3 or 4 other organizations, or the following organizations. But rather than sort of listing each one separately and putting all these different dates and, again, filler information, you've streamlined your involvement section or your leadership section to really highlight where you gave your most time, and acknowledging where you were also involved, but maybe there's not as much to talk about there. So moving on to the letters of recommendation. The letters of recommendation, there are some important pieces that I want to make sure you are aware of. First of all, spend some time thinking about who you will ask to write your letter of recommendation. At Chase, we take We do not require letters of recommendation, but we will take up to 4, and quite honestly, 2 is pretty sufficient. But we really ideally want to see letters of recommendation coming from faculty members or from maybe employers. The trend to try to have letter writers be from people that you think will be impressive to us typically falls a little flat because they don't really know you as well as maybe a faculty member or an employer would. They can't speak to certain skills that you have or tasks that you've taken on or how you were contributing to that particular classroom or organization. And so you want to just spend a moment to realize we don't care if you know a judge or a lawyer or someone who is influential. Rather, we're trying to get from the letter of recommendation additional information to help us make a decision about admission. So I would encourage you to stick to faculty or employers. And if you don't have any of those, then maybe the next best step would be if you have been involved in the community in some way, where someone could speak about that level of contribution you made or some insight as to a certain skill or work ethic that you have, that's going to be the most helpful. Next, schedule a meeting with your recommender. Oftentimes, recommenders don't really know how to write letters of recommendation, or they may not know everything about you. So find if they would like to meet with you just to hear from you what your motivation for going to law school is, or maybe they need a reminder of what projects you worked on for them, or where in the classroom you maybe took on some additional work, or they might want to talk a little bit about your performance. Anything that can be helpful to pass along to the recommender will be easier for them to write a really full, complete letter of recommendation rather than just one that comes across as a little bit of a form letter where they just sort of acknowledge, yeah, you're this really great person. They think that you would make a great lawyer, signed so-and-so. That won't be held against you, but again, it's not going to add much to your file, and your goal is you want to highlight highlight yourself and highlight your accomplishments, and this is one way to do it. Next, make sure you understand the process for submitting letters of recommendation. The letters of recommendation do have to be sent to the Law School Admission Council, and every law school may differ a bit in how their process is. So I mentioned earlier, we don't require them. And that means we're going to read your file even if there are 0 recommendations on file. If another law school requires letters of recommendation, that might mean that they're not going to read your file and make a decision until those letters are with your application. So you want to just be very clear what the requirements are. And you also want to understand, how do I go through that? Can they email the letter of recommendation to LSAC? If they're going to mail it, who and where do they mail it to? And all of that information can be found on the Law School Admission Council's website. And it would also be part of your Credential Assembly Service instructions. So be sure to check out those resources and know that you have a very good understanding of how these letters of recommendation are submitted so that you can assist the person who is writing the letter of recommendation for you. Because you are relying on someone else to take a step and complete this task for you, give them enough time. I would say, sort of professionally, I would love if someone gives me at least 6 weeks to a month in advance notice. We are all busy at different times, and a little bit of notice gives us a chance to put that into our planner. Someone who rushes in right at the last minute and says, I need this turned in next week, I'm maybe a little taken aback by that, because that's a little disrespectful maybe to my time. I don't want to certainly disappoint someone that I do think highly of, but the unrealistic expectation means I might put together a letter of recommendation that doesn't go into as much depth as I would like because of the limited time. So just keep in mind those things will be important as you start that process. And then finally, anytime that you have a question about getting your resume together, or advice for your letters of recommendation, or any parts of your admissions application, please know that we are here and available to schedule a one-on-one advising session with you. We can do that over the phone. We can do that via Zoom. And there might be possible times when we're able to do that in person, depending on the time of year and what might be happening across the country. So reach out to us either via email or phone, and we'd be happy to set that up for you. So that concludes this particular workshop on resumes and letters of recommendation. I hope you found it to be helpful. If you do have any questions, please reach out, and be sure to check out our other parts of our admissions counseling series that will cover different pieces of the application process. We've put these together to hopefully make it a pretty easy and seamless process for you, and to know that we are here to help you and look forward to working with you. Thank you.